Chapter 5.
Putting Transformative Theory into Practice, the Purple House Mediation with Commentary, Part 2. At the close of the fourth segment of the Purple House Mediation as presented in Chapter 4, it could have appeared that the session was winding down and that the parties were on the verge of concluding an agreement about how to approach the board regarding the color of the house. Elizabeth and Julie moved through some difficult conversation in Chapter 4, and although they did not reach a final resolution of the house issue, they did reach an agreement on how to proceed further, including some fairly specific details about how to present the matter to the board. In getting to that point, they also both made significant gains in clarity and calmness, beginning in Segment 3 and continuing, if not always smoothly, through Segment 4. Both parties seem to be making decisions quite deliberately at the end of Segment 4. In sum, it is entirely possible to imagine the session coming to a close at this point, apart from some minor wrapping up. At the same time, it also seems fairly clear, both from the parties' tone at the end of Segment 4 and from the recurrent bubbling up of comments about the race issue, that Elizabeth and Julie might have more to talk about if they wished to do so. Some mediators might decide at this point that such matters are much better left alone because resolving them in the course of a mediation session is unlikely, if not impossible, and because even trying to approach them might reignite animosity and scuttle the agreement about the house. In the transformative model, however, it is not the mediator's job to make such decisions about whether the session is over, about whether certain issues are best left alone, about whether an emerging agreement should be put at risk by resurfacing contentious matters. It is not the mediator's job to make decisions of any kind, but rather to support the parties' decision-making in every regard. So whether this mediation is over or whether it is simply turning a corner and going further is an open question for the mediator in this case, and one on which he is looking to the parties for direction. And he is prepared to follow them in whatever direction they decide to move. The significance of this readiness to follow the parties is evident as the rest of the Purple House mediation unfolds in this chapter, with the mediator working hard to support the increasingly difficult discussion that Elizabeth and Julie decide to have. The ultimate impact of taking this transformative approach to the case can be assessed at the end of this chapter.
The Purple House Mediation, Segment 5.
And that would be, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I had another topic.
No, that's fine. I'm just wondering, is that would then be presented as a letter to the board? Is that the way the board normally considers something like this, through somebody submitting
We could put
a
a photograph of the house in and a copy of the paragraph that's in question and how the committee feels and how you all feel, and let them do it. Mm-hmm. And I keep going back to this racism and diversity, and you're sighing again, but it's really hard for me to let that go.
Well, that seems like a personal thing also. I know my mom brought that out, but it seemed like it's really, she let it go, and you're still...
But she brought up something really important, which is that there's no diversity on the board.
And you're still being eaten up by, what was bothering her. So.
I'm also trying to respond to what she said. There are no African Americans, Asians, she's right, on the board. And I think that's very unfortunate. And I'd like to see if maybe there isn't something we could do to work on that independent of this. Because it is a matter of election, and elections are coming up soon, and there might be something that we could do to work on that.
Is that something, and that's something you'd like to talk about here, Julie?
Well, I'd sort of like to know what Elizabeth's response to it is. Bernice is nodding her head, but...
I'm spent. I'm sorry. But I'm absolutely, I'm spent.
I think my mom would agree that we need more, and different races on the board. I think we have it in our community. Why shouldn't we have it on the board? And I think if the issue was re-examined and we had the different races on the board, it probably would be a different, resolution to all this, a more expedient one and one that.
Or whatever the
clarifies.
resolution was, it would maybe feel fairer because.
Exactly. I think so.
If you're spent, then now isn't the time to have this conversation, maybe, but
Well, I think my mom is
I would like to have this
a little
conversation.
tired of the issue, but I think she agrees with what I'm saying here. Yes.
Is it, and again, that's something you could decide to pursue in the future. It's something that Elizabeth, you've said that you're pretty much exhausted from the discussion today. I don't know how you feel about continuing to talk about this or have the conversation go on between Bernice and Julie about this now, or whether you'd really like to table the whole thing and take it up another time. It's really up to all of you.
I just have such a challenge that it's wearying.
The challenge
I mean, the challenge of dealing with racism in America. And in one easy sentence or two, we're going to correct it and make everything all right. And it's just not so easy. And the pain that it inflicts isn't just not like, okay, why this community is quite what? It's got to be at least, 15 or 20 years old, even older than that. And why does someone have to accuse Julie of being what she is, a racist?
How do you know that? How do you know that?
And then after that, she comes and says, "Oh, very conciliatory. Yes, yes, we can make the board diverse now." Huh? Is it just news?
Do you enjoy living in a racist society? It sounds like you're trying to perpetuate it.
No, she
It
doesn't.
sounds
Mom
like when
doesn't
somebody
want it.
reaches out to you, the thought that something might change is so traumatic that you don't want to have anything to do with it. It's easier to just accuse people.
No. Julie, reaching out is when you move in next door and somebody knocks on your door and says, "Welcome." Reaching out is when you move in the neighborhood and you say, we've got this monthly meeting that we have. Would you come? Reaching out is inviting us to the table, not being forced to invite us to the table, not because somebody called you a racist, so then you say, "Oh, I feel so bad. Somebody called me a racist. I've got a son-in-law who's black. Oh, well, I tell you what we'll do. We'll get other people on the community, other black people, and therefore you've reached out to me? Come on." And you want to solve it in 10 easy lessons or 2 sentences with a mediator? You cannot cure 400 years of racism in 5 minutes.
I'm not trying to cure it in 5 minutes. I'm trying to take a step. A little teeny tiny
You have
step.
taken the little teeny tiny step, okay? You've taken it, okay? Now feel good. You have taken the tiny little step. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, please.
Thank you. I'm sorry, but this is just too much.
Well, and so maybe this is a discussion that you really can't have.
Clearly not.
Or that you don't want to have.
It just cannot be resolved so easily.
I'm not trying to
And
resolve.
first of all, somebody has to admit. Not deny, but admit. That's where the healing begins. I heal if I say, I have a problem. Then I can face the problem. But to deny that I have a problem, To deny, if I'm an alcoholic and I say, oh, I'm not an alcoholic, the first step is when you stand up in the room, you say, I am an alcoholic. That's when the healing begins. Yes, I'm a racist. That's when the healing begins.
I'm not a racist. I just don't like purple houses. I don't like purple houses.
It's
And
not
to
about
take
your
that and
taste.
translate that into racism is really limited vision.
It's mob. It's a mob.
You keep saying that, but where I'm sitting, it's purple.
It's in the purple family.
I believe
but
that you
it's
go to
not
art school
a
and
mob-
you
it's a
see
mob
distinctions that I don't see, but it's purple to me. And every other house is blue or yellow or white or beige or gray, and then there's this purple house.
Well, you see different colors. You see different colors, right? And you also clearly see different realities in terms of what's racism.
Well, she said conservative. What did she say? Predictable. So the only thing she left out was white. White, conservative, predictable.
You're stuck.
I'm
You're
stuck.
really stuck.
I'm stuck. I am stuck.
I don't know what else I can do. I'll write the letter. You'll vet it. Between the two of us, we'll work out a neutral presentation. We'll send it to the board, and we'll see what comes out of that.
Okay.
Commentary, Segment 5. The discussion at the end of Segment 4 seemed to reach a conclusion, but that conclusion was only apparent because in this segment the parties choose, or at least Julie does, to go back to another topic. The mediator follows where the parties lead, and though they move into a very difficult terrain, further positive shifts are still in evidence here. 1. The first noteworthy point is that this segment illustrates the real unpredictability of conflict conversations when the parties are allowed to be in control. The topic of race has surfaced over and over, but each time it was dropped because it was too deep and the discussion went back to the House at the party's direction. Having directed the conversation away from race, they now direct it back to that subject, deep or not. Readers may wonder why the mediator permits the reintroduction of the race question. It puts the resolution of the House issue at risk because this volatile subject may explode the whole conversation. Why risk the agreement to discuss an almost certainly insoluble, intangible issue? Also, why does the mediator consider racism a mediable issue to begin with? How can racism be mediated or, for that matter, negotiated? The answer to both of these questions is the same. In transformative mediation, parties decide and mediators support. What is worth discussing and worth exploring, what is mediable and what is not mediable, these are matters for the parties and not the mediator to decide. What is most surprising in this segment is how Elizabeth, who has resisted the race topic since she first introduced it, and here also begins by resisting it, now reverses herself and decides to talk about it. Why? First, when Julie brings the subject up again, the mediator does a reflection and check-in that allows Julie to elaborate that, "I'd certainly like to know what Elizabeth's response to it is," followed by the statement that, "I would like to have this conversation." Two very clear requests to talk about the subject with Elizabeth, made calmly and respectfully. Then, when Elizabeth rejects the request, "I'm spent," the mediator does a summary and check-in that invites all the parties to reflect on what to do with this topic. It is after hearing these requests and having the chance to reflect that Elizabeth decides to take up the challenge and talk directly about race with Julie. Her decision may also reflect the strength and clarity she's gathered cumulatively through the session. In effect, her decision to talk embodies two shifts: an empowerment shift, "I am strong enough now to talk about this," and a recognition shift, "I see you are sincerely interested in this, so I'll talk to you about it despite the difficulty." It is therefore possible to see in this segment the interplay between the mediator's interventions and the shifts that Elizabeth is able to make, and how the interventions support the shifts. 2. Another important point about this segment is that it shows both how difficult and how powerful conflict transformation can be, and how simple but difficult it is to support it. Once she decides to engage, Elizabeth's comments are both powerful and devastating. In effect, she finds her voice here and begins to speak passionately and eloquently. Listen to her words. About the challenge. It's wearying dealing with racism in America, and in one easy sentence or two, we're going to correct it and make everything all right, and it's not so easy. About the need to make the board diverse. Is this news? About reaching out to minorities. Reaching out is when somebody knocks on your door and says, welcome. Reaching out is when you move in and they say, we've got this monthly meeting, and would you come? Reaching out is inviting us to the table, not being forced to invite us because somebody called you a racist. About dealing with racism. First of all, somebody has to admit. That's the first. That's when the healing begins. Yes, I am a racist. That's when the healing begins. These are hard things to say, particularly to another person face to face. In saying these things so strongly and clearly, Elizabeth demonstrates both her strength and her willingness to connect with Julie, despite their distance. The fact that the parties' conversation in this segment and the next gets so harsh, so difficult, illustrates a key point about conflict transformation. Conflict interaction usually gets worse before it gets better. Reaching a turning point means going down to the depths, then climbing back up. For both Julie and Elizabeth, this is very tough, and it represents positive change. The fact that they sense this is what keeps them at it. This last point is also relevant to the mediator's work at this point in the conversation, which has two distinct dimensions. One part of the work he does is simply to remain present with the parties through this difficult exchange, as he did when anger first surfaced in segments 1 and 2. This intentional, calm presence provides support for the parties as they go into the hard conversations. His lack of alarm reinforces their confidence that whatever needs to be said can be said. At the same time, it allows him to overcome the impulse to soften things, which almost any person listening to such a conversation will feel. The second part of his work is to step in with a reflection, summary, or check-in when one of these is needed to support the hard conversation. In fact, he does all three in this segment, reflecting for Julie, that's something you'd like to talk about here, and Elizabeth, the challenge, checking in when they seem stumped, so maybe this is a discussion you really can't have, summarizing when they finish the cycle, well, you see different colors, and you see different realities in terms of what's racism. Again, this segment shows how these interventions, simple, modest, but not easy to deploy in this conversation as it unfolds, help support the parties' efforts to gather both their strength and their sense of connection, and then have this very difficult exchange. This segment also suggests, if the reader reflects on what the mediator does here, that his working in this way stems directly from his belief that the parties have both the desire and the capacity for both strength and connection. 3. Again, at the close of this segment, it seems that the session is at an end. The hard part of the conversation is indeed too hard to continue. For the mediator, two insights are useful at such a moment. First, if the conversation were to end here, the shifts already made by the parties represent real success, and they've changed the interaction significantly. In other words, success does not require total transformation any more than resolution. Second, it is still not for the mediator to step in and decide that the session is over. Conversation is full of surprises, and only when the parties stop talking is the conversation over.
The Purple House Mediation, Segment 6.
Between the two of us, we'll work out a neutral presentation, we'll send it to the board, and we'll see what comes out of that.
Okay.
That's that much you can agree on.
That much we can agree on. We cannot heal 400 years of racism in
When God
Tuesday.
forbid we should try.
Well, you tried, honey. You tried. You invited us to the table.
And I would ask you to go home and think about why you rejected it.
I did not reject it.
You
What
certainly did.
No, I did
You
not
certainly
reject
did.
it. I did not
You
reject
certainly
it.
did.
What I rejected is trying to make you feel better about it. That's what I
want to make
rejected.
you feel better.
I'm fine.
No, you're not fine. You sat here
Oh,
for the
you're
last
going to
hour accusing me of racism. You're not fine.
It seemed to bother you quite a bit more than it bothered me. I've lived with racism all my life.
Yeah, right. Because
I'm here to talk about the house.
but this is relevant.
Yeah, it's relevant, but
You cannot solve it. You want to feel better.
No, I don't want
Yes,
to feel.
you do.
And
You
stop
said-
imputing feelings
No, I'm not.
to me.
You said, I feel bad. It's unfair. You've been unfair to me. I tell you what I'll do to take a step in the right direction. What do you want me to do?
I said maybe we can work on something together. I did say that.
That is what? Getting a commitment, inviting us diversity to the board, inviting diversity to the committee. That was your step, yes?
Yes. Is that a bad thing?
That's fine. You've taken it. We've accepted it. That's a good idea. My daughter said that was a great idea.
we'll write the letter. I'll write the letter. We can do that. We can do that.
And it might be just worthwhile to, in terms of what sort of someone sitting over here hears you saying, that in terms of this larger issue of racism, relation between white and black and white, that apart from the feelings, not that that's not a major part of it, but that what, in terms of your word was healing, Elizabeth, that you may have different ideas about what that takes, what that means, what that would take. And your comment was, first you have to admit to what the situation is, or, for example, you were saying what that means, reaching out means coming over and knocking on the door, it means this.
Before we get here, yes.
Right, well, whatever stage.
Before one compels you to do that, yeah.
Right, okay, and Julie, you're saying that in terms of what it means to talk about that your suggestion of addressing the issue or listening to Elizabeth's comment about the lack of diversity on the board, that whatever else happened before, acknowledging that now, and
She's right.
and responding to it, what I hear you saying from your side is that the way you see that is it's not because you want to feel good, but because you acknowledge that, as you just said, she's right.
She's right. There are no African Americans or Asians or Hispanics on the board. She's right.
So what you're saying is,
And we should
separate from how you
fix it.
feel, she's right, and that situation is wrong.
Right.
Or is it
Yes, I am saying that. I didn't use that word, but yes, I am.
So, in other words, but on the other hand, that part of what you're saying may not be responsive 100%. That may not be exactly the kind of thing that Elizabeth is looking for. Again, that conversation is sort of you said, is a hard conversation to have, and it may not be possible to have it, to any kind of a conclusory point, in this room today. You've clearly started to talk about it, and I guess the plans you've made about writing the letter to the board concerning the house are pretty concrete. Is there anything you want to do about pursuing in any way this discussion about diversity on the board, the way in which new people to the community are welcomed into the community or not? Do you want to talk about anything else? Going anywhere else
I
with
can
that
think of
from
lots
today?
of ways to address the issue of diversity in our community. But if I'm going to be met every time with, I don't want to make you feel good, this isn't about you, and rejection of those ideas, then it's very hard to have the conversation.
How long have you lived in this community?
8 years.
8 years.
Mm-hmm.
And did you just discover today that it wasn't diverse on the committee? Did you just today decide to have these conciliatory steps? Was it just today? Was it just today, Julie? Did it ever occur to you 8 years ago or 7 years ago? Oh my, I don't live in a sea of whiteness. There's some Asians over there, there's some Latinos over there, there's some African Americans. I think there's even a couple of African and Haitian families. Did it ever occur to you? No, it didn't.
Did it ever occur to me that this was a multiracial community? Of course, I like it. That's why I'm here.
That your committee
Not
and
that
your
you would
board,
believe that.
That your committee and your board were not diverse, not reflective of the committee. No. And this is all I take exception to. Not that you're suddenly saying, oh, yes, that's a good idea. Let's make it more diverse. But to dare to say, in the one hand, oh, I'm not racist. Oh, no, I like the diversity. As long as we're in our place.
No, that's not what I said.
No, I don't mean it.
That's your
But
language.
it is
and
my
you
language.
are imputing it to me.
Exactly, I am. But if 7 years ago, Julie was a worker or of the mind, I am going to make this community in all ways as diverse as I can possibly make it. And you had opposition. I can understand it. But for you to dare come in here and in one or two sentences say, oh, yes, let's take steps. And I'm supposed to be what, placated? Well, I'm not.
Not
and yes, I do.
placated,
Yes,
but
I do
willing to
feel,
work with me.
I do.
Not
I
placated.
work with you.
Let's make it better.
Fine. Well, no. Fine.
Well, and
But do you see my point?
Because I haven't been an advocate.
well,
Not an advocate, honey.
Because I choose.
Not an advocate. You are the one who's saying, I care. My son-in-law is African American. I moved in this community because I wanted diversity. And yet in your very life, other than your son-in-law, is your world diverse? I don't think so.
You have no idea. You have
if I'm judging by this committee,
you have
you
no
can nominate.
idea.
Have you ever nominated a
Have you been to my
non-white for the
church?
committee?
Have you been to my church?
Have you ever nominated
Have
a
you
non?
been in the city
have
with
you
me?
ever nominated a non-white person to the board or to the committee?
I'm not on the nominating committee. I mean, it's an irrelevant question.
Julie, you always come up with excuses.
I just think you think everybody who's white is racist.
Please don't do that.
Well,
I am
please, you're
talking
doing
to
all these
you.
things to me.
I am speaking to you, specifically to you,
We're not racist, Julie.
specifically to you,
Yeah? Okay, me.
to you.
Can I ask just a question that I'm not sure whether this will clarify anything or not, but in the way you're describing the questions that you're asking, one of the implications that I'm hearing is when you use a term like racist, in this context, one of the things you mean by it is if you're living in a multiracial community, but participating in the management structure, a power structure that excludes everybody but one group, then whether or not there's an intention behind that or not, it's discriminatory. It's, in your word, racist. It excludes. I'm not sure I'm getting that right, but it's sort of, it seems like you're focusing on the committee.
In Julie's particular case,
I'm just trying to understand.
in
the
Julie's
meaning of-
particular case,
Yep.
because I don't want to, as a mediator, give you this definition of racism. No, I don't think that's an exclusion. It's certainly an exclusion that is questionable. Why is that exclusion taking place in a diverse community? Why? I mean, often people say they want to
Clearly,
be.
it's all my fault.
Julie, I'm really not only addressing the committee and the board. I'm not holding you accountable for the committee and the board totally. There are several incidences in the community, some of which I have named, that you have indeed, I feel,
Not that you
that
know.
have been racist. That some of your actions,
That I
your
have
words,
indeed what?
and your deeds have been racist, specifically. So now, you sit here at the table with a mediator and you say, I'm trying to take a step to correct the situation. And my daughter has said, that's great. Take the step. Do what you need to do. You've said you can't elect to the committee. You're not on the election, but you're going to take steps to make it more diverse. Do what you can. And I'm saying to you that the reason that I haven't turned on a dime and said, oh, thank you, great, is because you've been here 8 years. And what has it taken for you to make those steps? Has your heart been open in the 8 years? Yes, you moved in this community because you wanted diversity. What, to say you lived in a diverse, multiracial community? Multiracial diversity to me means some kind of interaction. It doesn't mean staying secular or integrated within your own separate groups. It doesn't mean the board, after umpteen years of a community existing, that it's still all white board, that it's still an all white committee, that all the committees that function in this, come on, and to
So
imply,
let's work to change it.
that's fine, but you cannot, what you must understand that now suddenly today the light bulb has gone on for whatever reason, and I am certainly suspicious of the motives, but okay.
What have I
That
got
we
to gain?
cannot, that suddenly the.
Are you going to
that-
change the color of your house because I do that? Of course not. So what would be my motive? What?
I don't believe you're hearing me. What I am saying,
You said you were suspicious,
Please.
and I want to know,
please.
why are you
hear
suspicious?
Me. The fact that you sit at this round table today and say to my daughter and myself, let us now open up the committees. Let's do something to make the committees and the board more diverse. That's fine. It will not suddenly then make all these feelings, make your 8-year history of action or the 20-some-odd year history of action of this community suddenly disappear. If the Ku Klux Klan came and hung, God forbid, lynched somebody, and then today they want to say, oh, I'm sorry, come move. It's not going to erase the horror, the hurt, and the ugliness of that period. That's all. The healing has begun, and I applaud you. Thank you. Yes, we will try to get into to take those steps. That's all I'm trying to say.
And what you're saying is that you're not ready to let go of, and you can't let go of the feelings that you have that you've expressed here today, and that probably you haven't expressed all.
They're not going to be so easy.
Not so easy, right?
That's right. It's not going to be,
And-
oh, I'm on the committee. Oh, I'm on the board. Oh, no problem. No.
Right. And Julie, I mean, you've sat here and been going through this discussion, which isn't all that easy discussion to have. Does that, I guess, this has been an important discussion for you to have, obviously, because you brought it back up again and you wanted to talk through some of this. I don't know what your thoughts are about where the discussion is at this point and how you feel about what's come out, whether you think that that's added to your clarity in the situation or understanding of it, and what Elizabeth's views of this are. Has that accomplished some of what you wanted to in having the discussion? And do you?
I can't say there was such clear intention in having it. I do hear Elizabeth saying that there's 400 years of discrimination, and that one gesture, or 8 years in a community, whichever number you want to use, and one gesture doesn't fix everything. And I appreciate that. Of course it doesn't. I guess I just wish that, although it doesn't put everything to rest, I felt like you were willing to be open to this anyway, or instead of just questioning my motives and dismissing it. That's what I wish.
Julie, I am a woman of God. And I don't want to hurt anyone. And as much as I may disagree with you, I don't want to leave you hurt. I am extending my hand. I don't want to hurt you.
Will you work with me?
I will.
Will
work
you
with
help
you.
me to work with you?
I will do my best. I will do my best.
Even though I don't like purple houses?
I like purple houses.
What color is it?
Mauve. Mauve.
You
like
do have a great job.
I know I do.
Thank you. Thank you.
I don't think there's much to say really after that.
Thank you.
Well, we've started the healing of 400 years of racism, but we still have a purple mauve house.
Right. You're not giving up that mauve house. Well, you've talked through a lot of stuff today, and that's part of what conversation is all about. So I hope that the next steps continue as you intend them to, and if there are other ways in which this kind of process can be helpful, I'm certainly willing to continue it if that's useful, whatever happens next. Do you feel comfortable about where you're leaving this at this point?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
This final segment, and especially the way the session ends, is very powerful, but it could be seen as somewhat unexpected, even unbelievable. As noted in the introduction, the simulation was unscripted and spontaneous. Indeed, the actors who played the parties were so affected afterward that they took several hours to discuss what had occurred and its implications for their own lives. The important point here is this. Understood in context, the conclusion of this mediation is not at all unbelievable. Rather, it grows organically out of what has occurred throughout the entire session, especially when seen in the light of transformative theory. 1. As in previous segments of the session, it is very evident in this segment that it is the parties and not the mediator who direct the conversation into its deepest levels. Consider how this segment begins. From the end of the previous segment, it would be hard to predict that the parties would go right back to the race topic, having just withdrawn from it with a sense of futility. To return to the issue is entirely party-directed. The mediator does nothing to steer them toward this subject, nor to steer them away. Indeed, he has done no steering of this kind at any point in the session. With the bitter back and forth at the start of this segment, some mediators might discourage the parties from going into this again. This mediator doesn't substitute his judgment for theirs on this or any question. In fact, the parties make a new choice in this segment. Previously, whenever one party pressed the race issue, the other withdrew. Now both are committed to see it through. This is their decision, and it carries the conversation to a new depth. 2. In the new depths that the conversation reaches, the parties themselves reach new heights of both strength of self and openness to each other. That is, their empowerment and recognition shifts not only continue but accelerate. Elizabeth, having decided to discuss racism with Julie, does so with clarity, articulation, and forcefulness that reflect clearly the strength she has gathered. She makes clear that Julie's long inaction and unconsciousness about diversity is the heart of her grievance. Did it ever occur to you that you don't live in a sea of whiteness? You can nominate. Have you ever nominated a non-white person? Julie, you always come up with the same excuses. She makes clear why she feels Julie's concern for diversity is suspect. You wanted diversity. What, to say you lived in a diverse community? Diversity means to me some kind of interaction. It doesn't mean staying within your own separate groups. It doesn't mean the board after umpteen years is still an all-white board. She makes clear that a reluctance to trust Julie's overture stems from her and her people's long struggle with racial oppression. It will not suddenly make all these feelings disappear. If the Ku Klux Klan came and lynched somebody, and then today they want to say, I'm sorry, it's not going to erase the horror, the hurt of that period. It's not going to be so easy. At the same time, Elizabeth's very willingness to make these statements to Julie and make them so honestly represents a remarkable level of openness and willingness to try connecting across the gulf of difference. In fact, her words show clearly that she wants to connect and believes this is possible, that Julie can get it. What you must understand, I don't believe you're hearing me. Please, please, hear me. By the very act of making these pleas for understanding, Elizabeth is showing that she recognizes a humanity in Julie that can respond to her and her daughter. For her part, Julie gets very clear about what it is that disturbs her so much, which is not only the charge of racism, and she finds the strength to express it. She realizes and states clearly that what really hurts her is the suspicion and rejection of her overtures. I can think of ways to address the issue of diversity, but if I'm going to be met with, I don't want to make you feel good, this isn't about you, and rejection of those ideas, then it's very hard. Julie's empowerment shift is expressed not only in this clarity, but also, ironically, in her willingness to say what she has realized, even though it shows her vulnerability. She finds the strength to display vulnerability. At the same time, throughout this segment, Julie expresses powerfully her desire, even determination, to connect with Elizabeth and her belief that this is possible. Regarding Elizabeth's argument that the board is not diverse, Julie repeats several times, she's right, and we should fix it, and affirms that the situation is wrong. She directly recognizes Elizabeth's views as valid. Julie persists in the discussion despite Elizabeth's unsparing statements and clearly tries very hard to listen and understand what she is hearing, which in itself strongly expresses her openness to Elizabeth. 3. The empowerment and recognition shifts visible in this segment are produced by the party's own efforts, not by the mediator. At the same time, the mediator's interventions support those efforts, and this is also visible at several points. The mediator uses, in this segment, all of the forms of intervention discussed earlier in the chapter: reflection, summary, check-in, and a careful reading of the transcript will show that Elizabeth's and Julie's shifts often build from these interventions. What is new in this segment is that, especially in reflections and summaries, the mediator is more willing to go beyond the party's exact language. Here are some examples. In his summary pointing out differences in their thinking about what it would take to heal the racial split, he refers to Julie's view that, separate from how you feel, she, Elizabeth, is right, and that situation of no diversity is wrong. This goes beyond Julie's words. She never used the term wrong, and she points this out but agrees that she is saying this. Later, in a reflection to Elizabeth after her bitter statements about the long years of an all-white board, the mediator says, "One of the implications that I'm hearing in your term racist in this context is if a management structure excludes everybody but one group, then whether or not there's an intention behind that, it's, in your word, racist." Again, this goes beyond Elizabeth's words, and she rejects this definition of racism by the mediator, but this is followed by her clarification that diversity means interaction, not staying within separate groups. In each of these interventions, the mediator goes beyond simply mirroring or condensing what the parties said. He adds an element of translation, describing what he thinks they are trying to get across and thus helping to surface this, even though he's going beyond their words. In doing this, there is a risk that the mediator will misinterpret what is said, steer the conversation away from the party's real intent, and thus violate the principle of party control. This risk is less if this is done late in the session, when close listening throughout has given the mediator a very strong feel for what the parties are trying to say. The risk is even less if the mediator offers his statement as only a draft of what was said and backs off quickly if it is rejected, as he does here when Elizabeth rejects his definition of racism. This enhanced form of reflection and summary, offered as a draft of what parties are saying, can help parties express points that are hard to surface and articulate. In effect, the mediator's draft, even if rejected, provides a platform that the parties can use to jump off from in saying what they want to. Here, for example, Elizabeth rejects the draft, but it still gives her momentum to move to her clearest and strongest statements about multiracial diversity, the horror of racism, and so forth. 4. With all of this in mind, the sudden turnaround at the end of the mediation seems neither sudden nor unbelievable, but rather a natural outgrowth of the way the conversation has progressed. The mediator's final check-in with Julie offers her the choice of how to respond to Elizabeth, to decide what, if anything, she wants to say, and she takes the opening. In response to Elizabeth's, "Please, hear me," and "It's not going to erase the horror, the hurt," Julie says, "I do hear, Elizabeth," and then she actually reflects to Elizabeth the very heart of what she's been asked to hear. There is 400 years of discrimination, and one gesture doesn't fix everything, and I appreciate that. Of course it doesn't. Thus, in this segment, Elizabeth accepted the challenge to explain herself to Julie, and Julie has now shown clearly that she understands. Then, in the final exchange, Julie says, "I just wish you were willing to be open to working together instead of questioning my motives and dismissing it." And Elizabeth responds, "I don't want to hurt anyone. And as much as I may disagree with you, I don't want to leave you hurt." Here, it is Julie who asks for understanding, and Elizabeth is ready to offer it, because the parties' shifts have changed their interaction from alienating and demonizing to connecting and humanizing. And Elizabeth wants to hold that new positive ground. The conclusion of the conversation confirms a key premise of the transformative model. People want to be neither victims nor victimizers. Elizabeth is not at all a victim by the end of this conversation, and she is equally unwilling to become a victimizer by denying Julie recognition. The disagreements between the parties remain. We still have a purple house. But they have transformed their interaction, and this occurred as a result of their choices and their efforts. The course of this mediation illustrates all of the basic assumptions of the transformative model. People in conflict are seeking interactional transformation as much or more than reaching settlements of concrete issues. In addition, people are capable of the self-determined decision-making and the uncoerced understanding of others that are needed for conflict transformation. The mediation also demonstrates how transformative mediators follow rather than lead the parties through the conversation, supporting and never supplanting party decision-making, supporting but never forcing inter-party understanding, and in general, working to support the empowerment and recognition shifts that transform conflict interaction.